Intertel, a project for international understanding through television, is a partnership of Rediffusion London, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and National Educational Television, with the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company of the United States.
Do you regard yourself as being exactly the same as everyone else except in your private sex life?
Certainly, yes. I don't think there's a typical human being. Similarly, I don't think there's a typical lesbian. I wish to be judged as a human being, not as a lesbian. I don't think the fact of being homosexual should be allowed to rule one's life completely and be the dominating factor in everything one does. I think one should be a whole human being.
How old were you when you realized you were homosexual?
Difficult, because I was sexually curious from, I don't know, about 14, and this took homosexual forms, but then so it did with the friends that I was curious with, who have since married and got families. When I saw their interest shifting, and say about 16 or 17, and knew that my interests weren't, then I began to think that I began to know that I had homosexual interests, even though I didn't know that I was homosexual for good.
Well, I was engaged to be married, and I suddenly realized that I didn't have the feelings towards the girl that I think I should have had, that I felt more inclined to be in the company of men rather than women.
How did you discover you were homosexual?
I think I first discovered I was homosexual after I was married, unfortunately.
Something like 1 person in 20 of both sexes is a practicing homosexual. This seems to be true in every country where serious investigations have been made into the subject. That's chiefly, so far, the countries of North America and Western Europe, including Britain. Many people think they can always tell a homosexual, but that's a complete illusion. The overwhelming majority of homosexuals are indistinguishable from other people, except, of course, in their private sex lives. Those we can pick out are a tiny minority, and people mistake that minority for the whole lot. The truth of the matter is that we all of us number homosexuals among our friends, our colleagues, our acquaintances, often our relations, without knowing who they are. Now, think what this 1 in 20 figure means. It means we must expect to find homosexuals living in every street of any town or village. It means there's quite likely to be one in any large family, several in every office block, several in every apartment block, every company, every club. In really big organizations like large firms, government departments, the armed forces and so on, there must be hundreds, even thousands. If they were all to leave their jobs simultaneously, the economy of the country would be thrown into something like chaos. Another interesting aspect of this 1 in 20 figure is that, as we might have expected perhaps, something like this proportion of the great figures of history seem to have been homosexual. Among the ancient Greeks it was normal practice. Socrates and Plato, the 2 greatest of philosophers, were both homosexual. So was Alexander the Great. Julius Caesar was described by one Roman senator as every woman's man and every man's woman. Many of the kings of England were homosexual, William Rufus, for instance, and Edward II, who was the most notorious example, King James I, who commissioned the authorized version of the Bible, and William of Orange, who was King William III of England. Perhaps the 2 greatest artists of all time were homosexual, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Abroad, some of the most militant of national leaders, for instance, Frederick the Great. At home, romantic poets like Shelley and Byron. Later homosexual writers of the 19th century included Tennyson in England, Hans Christian Andersen in Denmark, and Marcel Proust in France. The most famous of all homosexual composers was Tchaikovsky. The biggest scandal surrounding a British homosexual blew up round Oscar Wilde, but there were also homosexual men of action like Lord Kitchener and Lawrence of Arabia. The word homosexual comes from the Greek homos, meaning same. and it means to have sexual relations with somebody of the same sex as yourself. This, of course, applies to women just as it does to men. Women homosexuals are usually called lesbians, after the Greek island of Lesbos, where there was once a sort of community of homosexual women, including the famous poetess Sappho. In most countries, the law doesn't concern itself with the sexual behavior of adults in private, but there are a few exceptions, and among these are Britain and most of the United States. Yet the curious thing in these countries is that homosexual acts are only a crime if they're committed between men, not if they're committed between women. We'll be taking a closer look at female homosexuality later in the program, but let's first face the question, what's it like to be a male homosexual in a country where his only choice is between a lifetime of sexual abstinence or being a criminal?
Pretending the whole time, guarding your language the whole time. I feel that to a certain extent homosexuals can be recognised by what they say, even when they're discussing perfectly ordinary topics. Therefore I guard what I say, even on perfectly ordinary topics. I guard what I say the entire time.
How do you think homosexuals reveal themselves when they're talking about ordinary topics?
Perhaps in the assumptions they make about their future, which are going to be different from heterosexual futures. I make a deliberate effort in my conversation, sometimes, to imply that marriage is in my future. But talking at ease, I might give away the fact that, in practice, I know it's not going to be any part of my future. I might make some remark which shows I take it for granted that marriage, children, perhaps even a house, are sort of something I know are perhaps never going to happen to me. And that is possibly a giveaway.
Did you find it very hard to come to terms with the fact that you are homosexual?
Yes, from about 16 till about 22 or 23. The whole of that time it was associated in my mind with guilt, sordid matters, elderly, unpleasant men. It was in no way associated with reasonable, mature, normal, ordinary, pleasant people.
What happened to change this?
I met somebody who was reasonable, ordinary, pleasant, mature and normal, and who was queer.
And this quite changed your attitude to the subject?
Well, until then, I just didn't know anybody could be like this. I thought everybody was furtive if they were homosexual, and other unpleasant associated things. And just meeting somebody who wasn't opened my eyes to the possibility of being ordinary and queer.
Do you have any sexual feelings about women at all?
Virtually none. When you're exposed to continual magazine and film and book publicity on how desirable women are, some of it rubs off. At least you can understand it, whereas heterosexuals are always saying that they can't understand homosexuals. So you have that much feeling towards women. A little, yes. If you take me as being part homosexual, part heterosexual, I'm maybe 80% homosexual, but there's 20%, which allows me to understand and have some feeling for women, though not much.
Have you ever wanted to have or had sexual relations with a woman?
Once, yes.
Can you tell me about it? And what happened?
It just, I've frequently wanted girlfriends, just as a matter of social convenience as much as anything else. And we just got closer and closer, and she very much wanted it. And it just was unavoidable in the end.
Did you enjoy it?
No, not particularly. I enjoyed the final physical sensation, but nothing else about it, no. It was unsatisfactory for both of us, and she was very upset and that she couldn't understand my attitude, and she thought there was somebody else, which there was, of course.
Only that somebody else was a man.
Yes.
Many, perhaps most, homosexuals are married. This middle-aged office manager described what happened to him after he left his wife.
Well, it was that I came up to the big city, and I was looking for something, and, well, I'm very fortunate, because I used to wander around Piccadilly for someone to speak to when I first came up to London. I was so terribly lonely. I wandered around just for someone, just to say good evening, pass the time of day. Well, fortunately, I didn't move into the wrong circle. And eventually I made contacts not with homosexuals, because I didn't know really what I was looking for. But through an organisation, I met other friends, and strangely enough, it was the 11th of November one year, when I went to a church service with this organisation, that more or less changed my life. I met my partner, who has remained so for about 17 years now. And it is, as a married couple would consider normality, then so are we. We have everything in common. Well, I won't say everything, we have our differences of opinion, but we agree to differ. And in fact, we're considered more understanding with each other than quite a number of our married friends. It's just one of those things, thank heaven that we met as we did. And we've, as I say, been together for about 17 years now. Our families accept us. We each have brothers and sisters, and they all take it as completely granted when they ask one or the other in, then it's the two of us.
I think one of the barriers to public acceptance for you is that normal people, or most normal people, find what you physically do disgusting. What is your comment on that?
Well, personally, I find that what a normal heterosexual couple do is just the same to me. I find it, well, I won't say disgusting, but unnatural and repulsive. And I quite agree that whilst they consider they lead a normal life, I lead as completely a normal life as they do.
Can it be fully love in the same sense?
Well, I've been with my friend for 16, 17 years now, and it's a very great love, a very great feeling between us, and it's much greater than a lot of our heterosexual friends, their marriages.
Most homosexual partnerships are not so lasting. This young waiter talked about the...
I just go out and probably go to various places that one can go to in London, which are frequented invariably by homosexuals, and just walk along the street, and if someone looks at me knowingly and I may be interested, then I will endeavour to get... I just go out and probably go to various places that one can go to in London, which are frequented invariably by homosexuals, and just walk along the street, and if someone looks at me knowingly and I may be interested, then I will endeavour to get into conversation with the usual conventional way that, have you got a light, or what time is it, or, and probably go to various places that one can go to in London, which are frequented invariably by homosexuals, and just walk along the street, and if someone looks at me knowingly and I may be interested, then I will endeavour to get into conversation with the usual conventional way that, have you got a light, or what time is it, or something like this. But it doesn't necessarily have to be one particular place or one of many different places in London. It can happen just stepping out of one's door, or getting onto a bus or an old tube train, or even at work.
Do you meet homosexuals all the time, everywhere?
Constantly, yes.
Can you always tell that they're homosexual, do you think?
No, now. As a matter of fact, this doesn't necessarily come into my mind. If I'm attracted physically to someone, I will then endeavour to make an overture. If I get a negative answer, then I know I'm out of luck.
Loneliness is a burden for most homosexuals. A typical expression of this came from a man in his 60s.
Well, the chief disadvantage, as far as I'm concerned, is that I have no family, no children. And I like children, I should like to have them. But I suppose it is possible to do, but I think my relatives now know. I have the feeling that they know. They accepted my brothers and my sister too, but I think my relatives now know. I have the feeling that they know. They accepted my brothers and my sister, but we never mention it, you know.
What about your colleagues at work?
Well, I think in some cases they do, yes. And there are a few at work who I'm sure are. But I'm afraid they're the repressive kind. They want to repress it, and we never talk about it.
Homosexuals usually live two lives, one of which is completely concealed from their family and colleagues.
No.
How would they react if they did?
They'll be tremendously shocked. The reason is that I live a very normal life. I'm back home, and I really live two lives, one here and one up north.
And one can tell from your accent that you're a Scot. Did being homosexual have anything to do with your coming to London?
Well, I suppose it did have something to do with it, because the bright lights and the company and the certain amount of freedom were here, which we don't have back home.
Has it affected the course of your career at all?
Well, it has, inasmuch as I have just lost my job because of being homosexual.
Tell me about that.
Well, my company received an anonymous phone, a friend, and I was summoned into the office and told that they had received a phone call saying I was homosexual. Did I deny this? And of course I didn't deny it, because living a lie is one thing and living a bigger lie is even more. So I said no, I was homosexual. They said, well, they no longer wished my services, and I was fired as from tomorrow.
Amsterdam, the capital of Holland, where, as in most countries, homosexual acts are provided they take place between consenting adults and in private. No arrests, no prosecutions, no court cases for the newspapers to report. Homosexuals openly associate with one another, form clubs and societies, publish their own magazines. The most famous of these organizations is called COC. These are its headquarters in Amsterdam, but it has branches in 6 major cities and 4,000 members. Homosexual women as well as men belong to it, because of the staff are homosexual. They run the Society's advisory service, which is the most important part of its activity, but there are also reading rooms, lecture rooms, even a nightclub. The General Secretary, Mr. Fotma, himself a homosexual, talked about the provision which the Society makes for its members.
Well, we give them all over the country places where they can meet without interference from onlookers or just curious people. It is a society which is closed, it only has members, and this society has in 6 different cities a clubhouse or a bar or whatever you want to call it. But you have to be a member to get in, and that of course advantage which we have above other homosexual bars, because here people can really be their own and you don't have to worry about other people. And if you have a public bar, then everybody can walk in and you always feel more or less afraid that someone might recognize you, which may have consequences.
Do you allow heterosexuals to join COC?
Yes, we do. We have a few members that are heterosexuals, but they of course join the club for another reason. Maybe that's their son, their daughter, very good friend is a homosexual, that they are interested in the problem, a member.
What are the commonest problems that you have to deal with? What are the commonest problems that you have to deal with?
Well, that is within the law again, because even though homosexuality is legal, the legal age is 21. And when people get into trouble, it may be because they had a homosexual affair with someone under 21. That is the most common problem we are faced with. Another problem is blackmail, because it may sound funny that in a country where homosexuality is legal that we still have blackmail. Sometimes people have a position in life where they just cannot confess they're being homosexual, and then no one else wants to hurt them and tries blackmail.
In places like the COC, homosexuals can do all the things like dancing that are normal between the sexes in England. This applies to members as well as the men. The involuntaries and affections and physical responses that they feel can be given spontaneous expression. They don't have to pretend or conceal. If they want to put their arms round each other, they do it without thinking. It was in places like these that I first fully realized that their feelings for each other seem to them as natural and are as strong as those between normal members of opposite sexes. I asked one of them if he was as open about his sex life to his family.
Partly. My brother, for instance, knows. I first discovered many years ago that I was attracted to my own sex. And we were both very young, and he said, oh, and integrated the fact in his daily thoughts. And still, he's living in an apartment. He brings along his girls, and we discuss together his girls, and there is really not the slightest difference.
Do the colleagues that you work with know that you're homosexual?
Yes, certainly. They accept it as if I weren't. You know, they don't talk all day long about their girls, and I don't tell new successes in homosexual circles, if that's so we get along. They simply accept me as any other colleague or friend. There's no difference.
Do you find then that there are no disadvantages
to me? There are no disadvantages, but I suppose that in other circles, towns or something like that, you know, where progress and new way of thinking did not reach the public, it must be difficult. There must for a homosexual. But personally, I have no difficulty whatsoever.
The other side of the story, the difficulties, were...
First of all, men. You both have your job. You both have different interests. You both still have your own family. Sometimes one of the partner's family does accept it, and the other partner's family does not. In one way, you always have to pretend something. Also, having different jobs makes it difficult because, well, one is always earning a bit more than the other, no matter which you turn, and that may make problems sometimes.
Do you mean problems connected with sharing?
Yes. Also, let's say the housekeeping in itself.
I hate washing dishes, but I like to cook, so I do the cooking, and my friend, he does the dishes. So we arrange it in that way.
None for the homosexual condition. Perhaps none ever will. But on my return to England, I asked homosexuals if they would still remain homosexuals if they had the opportunity to change.
No, in what it is, I would be heterosexual. But of course, I suppose best to be bisexual, have the best of two worlds.
Do you think that most homosexuals would in fact choose to be heterosexuals if they could?
Yes, I think so.
What difference do you think it would make to you personally if the law were changed?
I don't think personally. I'm very fortunate that I'm living a normal life. But for all these other people, and there are many, who live in seclusion because they know they're different, but how, why, they don't know. If only they could go to someone, even the doctor, someone to talk it over with, or a society to discuss their problems and let them realize that they're completely normal. That is the unfortunate part. They think they're abnormal, and let's face it, they're not.
Can you help being a homosexual, do you think?
Not now. I am what I am, and I can do nothing about it. I feel this anyway.
This is something that's hard for the rest of us to grasp, but it's fundamental. A person can't choose to be or not be homosexual, and most homosexuals deeply wish that they weren't. Now, most of the problems a homosexual has to face are not created by the law. Internal conflicts, guilt feelings and the rest, social disapproval, the absence of wives and above all children, loneliness in middle and later life, all these very serious handicaps won't disappear if the law is changed. In fact, we find that lesbians suffer from them just as much, and there's no law against lesbianism. It's a striking thing that women are as secretive about their homosexuality as if it were a crime. They're as secretive as the men are. Only a small minority dare to be open about it, like this secretary from the north of England.
Well, it's really that I want to love and be loved by another woman.
How can you find such a woman?
Well, that's the difficulty. In a way, it means that I have to keep making friends with people because I can't find out unless I make friends with them. And then, if they are lesbian, there's hope for me. But even then there isn't hope unless they happen to take to me.
Can you tell by looking at a woman whether she's lesbian or
Not
not?
at all.
You think that's a complete myth?
An absolute myth. Because I've been looking out hard enough. For years and years and years I've fallen in love with various women. But they've never reciprocated my feeling. Not until I was 36 did anyone reciprocate my feeling. I used to fall in love and then feel quite happy about it at first, and I thought, oh, but it's hopeless, you won't reciprocate my feeling, and I was right, she didn't. I very often remained friendly with that person, but of course I was very disappointed.
What do you do when men make advances to you?
Well, I don't know what, I try to keep quite calm about it. And I have been out with boyfriends. In my early 20s I went out with a few. And I didn't find the love-making repulsive. I'd say that it was fun in its way. But I would never fall in love with men like I fall in love with women. And with one particular boyfriend, I fell in love with his sister.
And so I used to enjoy going to the house to play games because I loved the company of his sister, who incidentally was married, but you see, I enjoyed her company in a mild sort of way, you see.
Did she realise that this was how you felt?
Oh, I don't think so. I think she just thought that I found her jolly because she was married and expecting a baby, but I enjoyed the happy atmosphere that she created.
It isn't a case of waking up one morning and discovering, oh, I'm homosexual. It's more something which is there all the time. You're always aware of it, even if you can't give a name to it. Even from childhood, I think, there's always this feeling of being somehow different. And just as sex is a sort of gradual awakening, I think the realisation of homosexuality is also a gradual awakening.
How did this gradual awakening take place in your own case?
From the age of 16 or so, I was aware that my sort of fantasy life was revolving in the main around women, hardly ever around men. Usually just one particular woman. At the same time, I went through the usual stages of having boyfriends, going out, but I never felt about any of them that this was the person I could spend my life with, as I had felt about one or two women. There was never any feeling of being in love.
When in the end the penny dropped, how did you react?
With relief, more than anything. Relief at knowing, at being certain at last what I was and how I fitted in. I think uncertainty, not knowing what you are, not knowing how you fit into society, this is the worst thing of all. And I think that there's more relief than anything when you finally accept it and settle down to live with it.
Doesn't your homosexuality seem to you in any way unnatural?
No, it never has. I've never had any feeling of unnaturalness or guilt, whatever. It's something completely natural to me.
Have you never had any moral or religious doubts about it?
No, I have felt guilt in the case of men who I've had to let down due to my own feelings. I couldn't reciprocate emotionally at all, even though I could reciprocate sexually. And it did give me a certain sense of guilt when I had to let these men down and say, I don't love you, it's no good going on. But the guilt of hurting people is the only kind of guilt I've ever felt about it.
Do you have no sexual feelings for men at all?
I can have sexual feelings for men to a certain extent, but that's all, and to me that's not a complete relationship. There must be a lot more than that. There must be love on an emotional level as well.
Can you explain what it is in addition to sexual feelings that you have for women that you can't have for men?
It's love.
As
Emotional
simple
love,
as
yes.
that.
It's being in love, which I cannot be with a man.
Do you live with one particular person at the moment?
Oh yes, yes.
And would you say that you are in love with
Most
that person?
definitely. Oh yes, most definitely.
Normal people often say that they find the idea of physical sex between two women disgusting. What do you say to that?
I regard sex as an expression of love. If you love someone, I think I think quite honestly it's cruel to withhold sex from them if this is what they and you want from the relationship. I think it is as cruel as it would be in a normal marriage.
Most lesbians in Britain are not open about it. They're afraid of shocking their family, scandalizing the neighbours, endangering their jobs. All over the country there are lesbian couples living together whose true relationship is unsuspected by others. I asked a member of one such couple to tell me about it.
We were both about the same age, about 25. We met quite by chance almost, and I looked at my present partner and decided that this was someone I liked, that I wanted to see again. I invited her home for a weekend. She came to my home several times for weekends and met my parents and family, and eventually she was living in a hostel and we decided that we would like to take a flat together. And during this period we fell in love. We decided that we in fact wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. And we were very fortunate. We were able to find a flat and eventually a house, and we have lived together quite amicably ever since.
How long is that?
That's about 20 years now.
You've had this lifelong relationship, but I think the public seem to imagine that most homosexuals are promiscuous. What do you say to that?
I don't think for one moment that they are. I think it's very easy for a homosexual to be promiscuous. There's nothing to hold them together. But at the same time, I don't accept myself that promiscuity is something which homosexuals do indulge in to any great extent. I certainly feel very strongly against it.
Is a relationship like this a sort of imitation marriage, or is it something quite different from that?
It's not in fact an imitation marriage, it is a real marriage in the sense that it is a union between two people. It can't in fact be precisely the same as a heterosexual marriage. There are no children, as you say, but in any other sense it is in fact a marriage between two people, and it is a permanent association of two people.
The million or so lesbians in Great Britain form a cross-section of society. In their sexual nature, they're also widely different. At one end of the spectrum is the girl who seems to feel an almost equal sexual response to both men and women.
My first sexual experience was when I was a student at Oxford. I fell in love with a woman and had an affair lasting for a year with her. Then after leaving Oxford, I had a very brief affair with a man, quite a casual affair. Since I've had an affair with another woman and a lasting affair with a married woman. It's also very emotionally involved with a man, married man.
Now, most people think that to be sexually involved with people of both sexes like this is perverted. What do you say to that?
It is perfectly natural to me. I always find it strange that people are attracted exclusively to one sex. I've always been, since I can remember, attracted to both sexes equally.
Is it the same for you when you're sexually attracted to a woman as to a man, or is it different?
I'm not conscious of any differences at all.
None whatever?
No.
But don't the anatomical differences between men and women mean that the sexual relationship can't be the same?
No, they make very little difference. It's the person that matters and not the sex.
A minority of lesbians can be recognized as such. This 19-year-old girl has worn nothing but boys' clothes for some years.
Well, I was brought up with boys. I've got no sisters. I think I was more or less a tomboy from the start, from a very early age. And I used to go about in these dungarees and t-shirts and so on, you know. And then when I started secondary school, I naturally had to wear a uniform. And this, to me, was terrible, you know. I used to dread going to school, not because it was school, but because I had to put a uniform on every day, and a dress, and stockings and so on, and things like that, you know. And I really couldn't bear it. I couldn't wait to get home in the evening to change into my slacks. And I've always wanted to wear boys' clothes.
Have you never once wore women's clothes since the age of 14?
Yeah, when I was about 15, my brother asked me to go to his wedding. It was his day, and he was getting married. And my mother turned around to me and she said, "Now listen, your brother's getting married, and you can't possibly refuse to be a bridesmaid, therefore you'll have to wear a dress and you'll have to have your hair set," because it was a shade longer then. It was possible to have it set and so on. And I said no at first. No, so she said, "Well, this isn't very good. I mean, it's your brother's wedding, you must." And she kept on about it so much. And my brother was really hurt that I wouldn't go to his wedding, you know. I said, "Okay." And I got fitted up for a dress and so on. I went to the wedding, and directly afterwards, when everyone went to the reception, I went home and changed into a pair of jeans and walked down to the reception and wasn't allowed in, you know. I was told to go back that minute and put a dress on. But I never went back.
How do the shop assistants react when you walk in to buy men's clothes?
Well, 9 times out of 10 they don't know that I'm a girl. But there is the odd occasion where I've gone into a shop and they said, "Oh, yes, sir," and then somebody said, "Is that a girl?" You know, and straight away, it's sort of, the shop's gone in confusion and chaos all round, you know, and everybody's staring.
Because lesbians are a cross-section, by the sheer law of averages, there are naturally many to be found in those professions which are predominantly staffed by women, like nursing and teaching. Now, you're a school teacher, and as you must know, a tremendous number of parents are very frightened at the idea that their daughter might be taught by a lesbian teacher. What's your comment on that?
I suppose there is a danger in some cases, but I mean, if this was really dangerous, I mean, no man would be allowed to teach in a girls' school, and no one's going to suggest that. As far as I'm concerned, my professional life and my private life are utterly separate and have to be utterly separate.
Do you feel any sexual attraction for the girls you teach?
None at all.
What is lesbianism? What causes it? Can it be cured? I spoke to a doctor with a Harley Street practice, many of whose patients are lesbian. I started by asking her what proportion of women are practicing homosexuals.
Nobody knows exactly, but there are the same number, probably the same number of lesbians as there are male homosexuals. Surveys in Western Europe settle for somewhere between 6 and 4%. That's 1 in 20 people you know.
Are they to be found equally in all sections of society?
Yes.
What do lesbians actually do?
Allowing for the anatomical differences, the same sort of things as any normal couple do, with all the variations which normal couples indulge in.
Are they born that way, or do they become like it?
Well, I don't think they are born that way. I think the damage is probably done very early in infancy in some cases, sometimes later. The amount of sexual drive a person has may certainly be decided partly genetically, but not its direction.
Once a girl is lesbian, can anything be done to change that?
I think so, if she's still fairly young and she's dissatisfied herself with her way of life. This depends terribly on how early the damage was done, how deep it goes. And basically, again, I suppose, on her own feelings about it.
Does a woman always necessarily know if she's a lesbian?
Oh no, I think very often she doesn't. She may not know that such things exist at all. She may know but completely repress the feelings she has in herself because they're unacceptable to her until some crisis in her life when the truth dawns on her. Or she may go to the other extreme, having read some popular book on psychology, having experienced some emotional feelings for another woman, maybe the gamesmistress or something of that nature, be convinced that she must be lesbian. I think either extreme is likely to be equally disastrous. We all have, or a great many of us, probably all, have some homosexual tendencies hidden well away. This does not make a satisfactory heterosexual relationship entirely impossible.
As someone who's professionally concerned with this problem, what do you think of general social attitudes towards it?
I'd like to see a greater tolerance on all our parts for those people who are able to live a completely full life, have found some measure of sound relationships with other people, some measure of self-expression, and to make it possible for them to live the fullest life they can in their particular way.
This is a monthly magazine being produced by the Minorities Research Group, now known as MRG, which was founded in 1964 by and for lesbians. With a membership of 400 or 500 and rising, it's run from an office in central London. I asked its secretary and co-founder, Miss Esme Langley, what its main activities were.
Counselling service is our prime concern, and also establishing centres where people can meet and discuss their problems, and social activities. We have a library and an information service. People can get books that they wouldn't be able to get from their public library because they're published abroad.
Do most of your members really just want to meet each other?
Not most of them, no. Some of them do, but we don't encourage this.
Why not?
Because our aims are much broader than that, and if they can't support our aims, then we haven't got very much time for them.
What do you find that the commonest problems that you have to deal with are?
Isolation, and the inability to find anyone who is capable of understanding the difficulties that people have, and fear of losing employment if this comes out, and generally the difficulties you would expect where a person has got to lead a double life.
Since you founded this group, has the development of it surprised you in any way?
Only that we've had a remarkable number of letters from married women, which rather startled me. I had no idea that so many married women still feel that they are basically homosexual.
I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know whether it was me or whether it was my husband. So I then, quite deliberately and experimentally, shame-makingly, I had 2 experiences with other men, and I realized that it wasn't my husband, and that there was something just missing in my makeup.
Can you put into words what it felt like making love to a man? What felt wrong about it?
It felt perverted to me. It was perverted for me. It felt horrific.
Was it disgusting, or was it frightening, or was it both of those things, or was it something else?
It was frightening. It was just nothing, and it was wrong. It felt wrong. And the experience with this woman felt right, absolutely right. And I thought, well, this is what's been missing all the time, and this is what is wrong with me. And now I know the type of person I am.
And how did you react to that realization?
Well, oddly enough, everything slotted into place. And I looked back at all sorts of episodes in my life, and the whole thing became clear to me.
You suddenly understood yourself
I
for the first
understood
time.
myself for the first time ever.
Having no children, she left her husband to have what she thought was to be a permanent relationship with this other woman. But after 5 years, her partner went off and married a man, leaving her again entirely alone.
Well, I cut myself off completely from all sort of social intercourse, and I lived completely alone. I worked alone in my daytime job in a small cell of an office, and I went home every night to a small cell of a bed-sitter. After about 18 months of this, and realizing all the time how it was stultifying my personality and how unbearable it was, I decided that the only thing I could do was work all the time, and that was the only way I could sort of keep my mind off things. So I took a part-time job, and I worked during the day in my office. I worked in the evenings in my bedsit and at the weekends, and I just worked and worked and worked. And then eventually, only last June, I heard about MRG, and I contacted them, thinking it might be some frightful organisation, and it wasn't. I met the people in it, and I've had a great deal of help from them. And now I feel I'm more extrovert than I've ever been in my entire life, which is why I'm able to talk to you. I could never have done it before.
How does your life seem to you now when you look back over it?
A complete waste, really.
In what way?
Well, this is going to sound perfectly frightful, but I feel if only I'd known years ago, I could have had a certain amount of life. As it is, I've had 5 years.
and nothing else counts.
If you could live life all over again and could choose, would you choose to be homosexual?
Not unless it was thrust upon me, as it has been, by the fact that I am, and there's nothing I can do about it. Heaven knows I've tried. No, there's absolutely no advantage in being a homosexual in a heterosexual world, obviously. And there's no happiness, really.
The mother of one of the lesbians who has appeared in this program told me how she discovered that her daughter was homosexual.
Well, she told me herself. She wrote, first of all, and then came on a visit to us. Of course, she was living away from home then. She came home and she told us. And that was our first knowledge of it.
How did you react at the time? What did you feel?
Oh, well, at first, terrific shock and fear to a certain extent, not for ourselves and not for what people would think really, but fear for her, what she'd have to face in her future life. I think that was the worst part about it.
Have your feelings about it changed since?
Yes, very much indeed. I have accepted it, and of course what made me accept it was the fact that I realized that her great confidence in us made her tell us. She'd no fear about telling us, although probably she may have felt very fearful about it, but I think she had sufficient confidence in us to know how we would react. We naturally, as parents, felt very sad about it, but I realized that she was still exactly the same person. After having told us, she hadn't changed at all. She was just the same girl, and I think she had a right to expect that we wouldn't change as parents either, that we should be just the same parents, and I hope we've proved that we are.
We have just seen a documentary on an important subject, one which many of us believe to be a mental health problem of considerable magnitude. I shall cover some highlights of the psychiatric aspects of this condition. Homosexuality is a disorder of sexual development. Homosexuals are born biologically normal, same as everybody else, but they are subjected to adverse influences which result in pervasive fears of the opposite sex, particularly of sexual and romantic relatedness to the opposite sex. It goes without saying that anything that we can do to prevent future generations from suffering this affliction must be done. We are now in possession of the signs and symptoms of the pre-homosexual child, and it is important for us to indoctrinate teachers, physicians, and clergy, particularly teachers, about how to detect the pre-homosexual child. Early detection means the possibility of early treatment, both for the child and his parents. And there is every reason to believe that if early treatment can be initiated, the majority of these children can be saved from homosexuality. In a long-term study of 106 male homosexuals, all of whom were in psychoanalytic treatment, we found that the majority of the parents of these patients conformed to certain patterns. Most mothers were involved in an unusually close and over-intimate relationship with this son. He was generally their favorite. She spent a great deal of time with him, and often mothers openly preferred this son to their husband. Although themselves rather puritanical and portraying for the son a concept of maleness and masculinity as something aggressive and brutish and animal-like, they themselves were frequently seductive and engaged in inappropriate bathroom and sleeping arrangements with these sons. Fathers of homosexuals spent very little time with this son. He was generally their least favored child, and the fathers were openly or subtly hostile to the son, and not infrequently would humiliate the son, minimize him, and show contempt for him. It is my personal opinion that the father plays a central role in the production or prevention of male homosexuality. Where a boy has a constructive, supporting, warm relationship with a father, I do not believe that we will get a homosexual despite the adverse maternal influences to which I have already referred. With female homosexuality, there have not been comparable systematic studies, and the data derives from personal experience and case reports of colleagues. Invariably, the mother-daughter relationship is a disturbed one. Mothers are generally rejecting, hostile, and competitive to these daughters. The father of the lesbian varies. Some are seductive, as is the case with the mother of the male homosexual. Some are rejecting, and others fail to protect their daughter from unfair maternal treatment. Our study revealed, as have other studies, that treatment for the male homosexual can be successful. Roughly 1/3 of our patients became exclusively heterosexual. Half of this group were exclusively homosexual at the beginning of treatment, and some of them did not think they could change, nor did they care to change, although the majority did verbalize a wish to change at the beginning of treatment. Follow-up studies have indicated that the large majority of those who terminated their treatment exclusively heterosexual have remained so over a period of what is now almost 10 years.
NET, the National Educational Television Network.